Just talking musicals, musicals with you.
Hello, I'm Lesley Anne Knight and welcome to the Just Talking Musicals meetup, where I get to have a quick catch up with some of today's outstanding theatre professionals from the West End and Broadway. On the other side of the Zoom window today is a man who has worked closely with some of Broadway's finest talents and on some of the most glittering shows in a career that has spanned some 40 years, and yet chances are you may not have heard of him. My guest today is a dresser and has worked as an integral member of countless backstage teams on Broadway, ensuring the smooth running of not simply dressing his artists from top to toe, but all the logistics involved in presetting costumes backstage, ensuring quick changes between scenes, keeping the actors hydrated throughout, and navigating any post-show madness from stage door to awaiting transport. Aside from touring with the Joffrey Ballet and working with New York City Opera, the Met, the New York City Ballet and the Royal Shakespeare Company, today's guest has worked on 20 musicals on Broadway, including the original production of La Cage aux Folles, Gypsy with Tyne Daly, Guys and Dolls, Passion, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, The Producers, The Addams Family, and Hello Dolly with Bette Midler. He has done the entire run of 12 plays and worked on 20 different New York City theatres, including 11 years at the St. James Theatre doing 4 different shows. In his own words, he has had the pleasure of dressing, amongst others, Terence Mann, Whoopi Goldberg and Rupert Everett, and since 1992, he's been the personal dresser to none other than multi-award-winning actor Nathan Lane, who was described by the New York Times in 2010 as the greatest stage entertainer of the decade. In 2020, Nathan Lane personally nominated him for the Drama League Gratitude Award, saying, "This is easy. The person I would nominate for the Gratitude Award is Mr. Ken Brown, who's been my dresser since 1992. He's one of the great, great theatre professionals and a wonderful, wonderful man, and I treasure his professionalism and artistry and friendship. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Ken Brown to today's Just Talking Musicals meetup."
It's a pleasure to meet you, Lesley, and thank you so much for doing your homework and digging that out yourself. I didn't even point you to it. Good work.
Thank you very much. It's so lovely to meet you.
Yes.
So here we are on a very hot summer's day, August 2020.
On two sides of the Atlantic.
Exactly. And so we're on the meetup, and there are 7 questions by nature of the meetup. And my first question that I've asked everybody so far has been, what were you working on when the COVID lockdown took place?
I was doing a revival of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf at the Booth Theater in New York, starring Laurie Metcalf, Rupert Everett, Russell Tovey, and Patsy Farron. Directed by Joe Mantella, a top flight production. We did all together about 6 weeks. We did 8 performances, and then it was done.
So you were barely out of previews, I suppose, with that?
We weren't out of previews. We were still weeks away from opening. We were all called into the auditorium on Wednesday in the middle of the afternoon and told that a press release was about to go out that one of our ushers had tested positive for the virus. They had cleaned the theater overnight. They gave the audience the option to go home, or this was March 11th, I'm sorry. They gave the audience the option to stay or to go home. 25 people decided to leave, but the rest of the audience stayed and enjoyed the show. The next day, they told us to come in and take our things out. They put dust covers over the set, and that's how it sits today.
Wow, it's so sad, isn't it?
It is. I mean, everything was so brimming with potential, and then it's simply done. But it was simply done because it was for our safety. So I can't be too sad about it. It's for the audience's safety. And that's the thing that's going to keep us away from this for a while. No matter what we'd like to do, we have to do what is safe and prudent.
Yeah.
I believe today the numbers went over 5 million for people
Worldwide.
infected. Yes, worldwide. So it's a very serious thing, and however it impacts us, we'll just have to deal with it and do what's best. But
Yes,
yes,
exactly.
the show announced that it was closed with an English cast and a small cast. Laurie Metcalf went back to California. Russell and Patsy went straight back to the UK. Rupert hung around upstate for a while, but he's back in the UK now with his lovely dog. And that's all there is.
Do you know what's going to happen to the production? It was only a short run, wasn't it? I think in essentially. So
It's done.
yeah,
It's the opportunity for those people to come together again. There were that and Hangman, which also came from your country, because the casts were largely English and they needed to be housed while they were here. They made the official decision that they are closed.
yeah,
So they've finally announced a loadout for us to take the set pieces away. It was a very, very elaborate set with
yeah.
flying bookcases and a house that decomposed. It was quite a big deal, and it's all just for the record books now.
Yeah.
Won't
How
won't
sad.
be anymore. Yes, Hangman had such good advance press, and none of us had a chance to see that. And the company with Patti LuPone had also just started previews. We were all on the same block, and we all ended on the same day. So I don't know if they have any plans to resuscitate the company, but the two of us that bookended it are done.
It's happened the same in London as well, and it's unprecedented in theatrical
Yes,
history, really, isn't it, around the world? And but I don't.
completely.
Yeah.
When we had 9/11 in New York, I was doing producers and we missed 3 shows. Well, when my mother called me and told me turn on the television and I was told that the show was canceled, I knew it was something of enormous importance. But that was 3 performances. We're
Yeah.
going to be dark for well over a year.
Yeah.
So no, there's nothing like it at all. And it will take a long time for it to be safe for audiences to come back. And we just have to consider that. We have to leave it to science, I think.
Well, fingers crossed for a vaccine, obviously, that we're all hoping for. But I remember I read something in the news the other day about was it the Drama League on Broadway? We're talking about hopefully beginning to open Broadway up in January next year.
I think there are 2 pieces of information that when you hear news like that, you need to think, is that about when people will really do plays, or is that to serve ticket situation?
Yeah.
I believe, they moved it forward 3 months at a time because that's how much they were processing the ticket refunds.
Yeah.
So now they're officially processing refunds through the end of the year. I don't think that means that when we cross into January, it starts up. I think that means another block of tickets may then be refunded or postponed. I was looking forward to working on The Music Man with Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster, and they have put forward another preview date in April and an opening date in May. But I think it's probably largely because the people who already bought tickets, it's to move them forward. But until we're told it's safe, we don't know that will be when we're actually walking in the stage door and doing the work.
Yeah, that's a very sensible view. But I know that hopefully, we're talking in this country and hearing from the science that hopefully we'll have a vaccine by the end of the year, beginning of next year. And I suppose it's dependent on a vaccine, isn't it, for safety for everybody?
It's absolutely dependent on the vaccine. It's absolutely dependent on science. And they have to do so many tests to make sure that the vaccine is both viable and effective. You want something that's going to have a large effective percentage and not just the first thing they think of. Of course, there's huge pressure to get anything out there so that people can be relieved of this aberrant situation.
Yeah.
But it needs to work, and it needs to be the right thing, and it needs to take as long as it takes, and we have to trust science to do it.
Yeah.
and show them all the respect their industry would show ours.
Yes. I mean, there's the interesting thing that I never realized until this all happened, that we in the UK, we're very lucky because we get a lot of funding in the arts. And I never realized quite how little America, the US was funded for the arts. There's not half as much support as we get.
Nothing.
We were surprised, you know, we were grateful for getting our bailout that we got, but countries, France bailed out the arts even greater amounts, but
Germany is a huge supporter of the arts. America, in the years that I've worked in the theater, you said 40 years on Broadway. I did 7 years of off-Broadway first, and the money for all of that was simply taken back. There had been more funding for the National Endowment for the Arts 35 years ago, but now it's all gone, and it's significantly impacted theater. So yes, we have no support like you have, and I think Germany probably has more than you.
Yes, well, they have. I think it's about the same in Germany now, since we've had some funding, but France significantly more, and they did that straight from lockdown, and they provided salary. They committed to paying salaries for anyone that was working in the theatre at the time of, or the arts at the time of lockdown, for a year until 2021. So everybody's salaries were protected.
We had a little tiny bit of that within Lincoln Center. New York City Ballet, the staff remained on salary, and everybody's taken as much film out of their archives as they can and put it out in media situations for people to see. But Broadway itself, the union has spoken out for us. The Broadway League has spoken out for us. I'm still alive and breathing, so I have to be grateful for that. And there has been this support of unemployment, but it's all touch and go. It's all touch and go what it will be. And so if you're in the arts, you have to be smart with money to begin with, or you're not going to make it. So there are no golden parachutes for us.
I tell you what, though, there's an interesting fact. I was just looking over here that I was reading. I've got tons of notes here for you. But I was looking at an interesting fact from the National Geographic magazine earlier today. And it's an extraordinary figure. And this was published in June 2020, that Broadway alone provided 96,900 jobs and 14.7 billion to the city's economy in 2019.
Yes, it's all the trickle down to the hotels, to the restaurants. All of those things are tied up in it. And yet New York City offers no tax support or financial support to Broadway theater at all.
It's terrible, isn't it?
And this, well, it's how it is.
Yeah.
It's how it is, and we deal with it, but it will certainly become more obvious after an event like this how crucial the arts are. It's not something elective that people do for fun, which is what a lot of people often believe. It's something that's absolutely a part of life. It stimulates life, it stimulates the economy, and it is essential, and it should be treated as such. It's not where the money's concerned.
No, and yet it brings in so much revenue, and it does anywhere. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we've established that it's not fair. But
we figured all that out now. They never ask us first, but we figured it out.
Yeah. Now the meetup is also about some fun questions, and my goodness,
all right.
You've worked on so many shows, and my first question of fun is, what is your, I don't think there can be one show, but what is your favorite show of all time?
Well, I have to be very careful not to say too many of the same things Corey English said, but I think the two best musicals there are Gypsy and The Producers, because they are two musicals that are about the theater. I think that's what makes them the most solid pieces, because they're about their own art form.
Yeah.
So that's it. That's the list.
I mean,
there's lots of other. What?
I was going to say, I'm not going to let you get away with just that. That's far too succinct. Oh. Because that's the other thing, for somebody watching this chat, there are a lot of people who go to see a musical, or they go to see a show, they go to the theatre, And they know that there's an orchestra there, or if it's a musical, they know that somebody's directed it. They know that somebody's definitely produced it. They know there are people on the stage, and they know that there are people doing stuff backstage, but they don't know the detail of what goes on backstage and how vital people backstage are. And your job is quite something, isn't it? It in itself, I have read, is choreographed, isn't it?
Of course it is. Of course it is. Everything, it's another role. It's just a role that's not seen.
Yeah.
It means that just like the actor has a track that he's on in scene 1 and in scene 3, I have a track that I put this costume at this place at this moment, go down the stairs, go under the stairs, come up to the other side, the water, go down. I have a path. It's just that my path is not seen and is not supposed to be seen.
And you have, what, do you just dress normal clothes? How do you dress at work?
Well, if a show is properly masked, and that's about a set issue, then I can pretty much wear whatever I like. That surprised me a little when I first went into Lacage. Of course, if it's not properly masked, or if there's a possibility of you being seen, then you're to be all in blacks. That's a standard tradition in the theater. There's all sorts of paraphernalia that I wear around my neck. Many dressers wear aprons. I need to have a bite light. When I did the producers, I needed backup cufflinks in case they broke during the scene. I needed collar stays if I had forgotten to put them in. I needed microphone tape if that sweated off. There was a whole series of things that I needed to have handy so that I was like a moving coffee table for whatever the performer might need at that moment. In Gypsy, the little girl had me carry a cup of tea with her when she was sick. And you do tea, you do water, you do medication, you do whatever is necessary to help them in those few seconds when they're not visible.
But you talk about tracks as well. I find that fascinating because the whole thing is mapped out, literally mapped out, isn't it? Because people, I think, probably have this sort of quite laid back vision that the dresser stays in the dressing room, and they don't, do they?
No, absolutely not. We're as active as the performer. We have the same bad knees, the same health issues, all of that stuff. No, we're a moving piece of scenery that different supervisors will sit down, and on an enormous show, it was on the resume, but you may not have noticed that A Christmas Carol that we did was the music by Lynn Ahrens, the Disney people. We had 92 people and a horse in that show. And there were Tony Walton did the sets. There were vast playing areas that all had their own geographic locations. And you do a lot of traveling. You walk miles and miles backstage going from where you're needed here. So what I started to say was Christmas Carol, the supervisor sat down with a computer and a flow chart, figured out where each of the 30-some dressers was at each moment in the show with the 92 people so that everybody could be followed.
How many dresses?
I think there were nearly 30.
Wow.
Which is it's because it was such an enormous and such a spread out area. It was at Madison Square Garden Theater. So there was a whole upper area that wasn't engaged in the theater, in the stage itself. There was the stage, and then there were built out areas that were different streets in London that went out into the auditorium. So just the real estate you have to cover with dressers moving about was vast. There were elevators that had to be employed. Yeah. So that was biggest, but that was how a supervisor maps it out. And in some situations, when you're assigned to an actor, you stay this close to the actor and find out every moment they step off stage. Somebody like Nathan in the pictures, I don't think there was one change that he had a chance to change jacket and pants, but in the other changes, they were an average 12 to 20 seconds. So you had to be at the right place with exactly what you needed, and he got into each outfit a half at a time. He would put on the jacket on stage and the pants in the wings. And people weren't to see it, but it was that precise, and you don't get to sit in the dressing room. That doesn't happen. Maybe
sorry, this is the thing that I'm fascinated by, because you've also got to learn. It's one thing for the performer has to know the order of everything, but you have to know it.
Yes.
You have to know all the
Yes.
cues, and you also have to know whether they're coming off stage right or they're coming off stage left, or they might be coming down through the stage. Or I
Yes.
mean, where's the craziest place you've ever had to wait?
Well, in Scarlet Pimpernel, there was a house unit went out to the center of the stage, and I had to wait in the upstairs of the house for the actor to come up and do a change before it went off. And in A Christmas Carol, again, there was a house unit in the center of the stage that I went out past the horse and put myself behind the house at the top of the show and waited there in the smoke and the fog through 5 scenes until the Scrooge character came off stage, and that was an 18-second change. He had to get into a flying harness and he had to get out of his suit, into the flying harness, and into the nightshirt and the cap. And while an understudy walked up the staircase, and the audience didn't know they weren't seeing the actual person. But I had to be stationed where I couldn't escape because it was in sight lines, and wait for him, do the change like that, and then as soon as the scenery moved, leave behind it.
Wow.
So it can trap you sometimes. It's very specific, and you'd best make sure you've gone to the bathroom first.
But there's so much to learn, isn't there? How did you get into doing this?
It's what I always intended to do. I studied it at college at Temple University. I worked, I did local theater in the town where I'm stuck now hiding. And I went to New York and established an apartment and some money in the bank, and then volunteered initially off Broadway. And then I was offered a position at the oldest running off-Broadway theater, Equity Library Theater, where we did winter stock, which was 8 shows a season, 4 musicals and 4 talking plays. And I did that for 7 years in charge of the entire costumes shop. And from that, eventually, I found out how to segue to Broadway. There are people who get right off the bus and go backstage and get hired, but I worked through every step of it and had plenty of skills to get me through that.
Yeah, and presumably you have a whole set of people who work in wardrobe as well, who take care of all the costumes. Or do you have a certain responsibility
That's us.
for the costume? That's you.
If you're dealing with a principal character, you're generally responsible for all of their clothes. If you're working with ensemble, then there are calls in the afternoon to come in and maintain things. It was slightly different in the UK when we did the producers. There was someone separate who only did laundry, who wasn't involved in the production at all. You know, the Drury Lane is a massive theater. Laundry's on the 6th floor. So it's all very specific responsibilities, and everybody has their area that they contribute.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned the producers a couple of times, and of course, what a fantastic show to work on.
Yes.
And with Mr. Lane. And you've developed really fantastic relationship with him.
We work well together. I spent more of my life doing the producers than any other show. We did it in Chicago for 3 months. Then we took it to New York, and it was a runaway hit. And in New York, what was immediately after New York, I stayed 2 or 3 people after Nathan left in New York, including Henry Goodman, who's from your country. And then the London production, I went over in a box to do that with Nathan again for 3 months, and then went back to the United States, did it on stage a little more, and then did the film. So with a commitment that big, it better be something I believe in.
Yeah.
And it is.
And what was it like to work on the film with the producers?
Well, of course, very different, very different. Film is not for me, but I did do it, and I felt I knew it already inside out.
Yeah.
And I knew the clothes certainly frontwards and backwards, although there were things that were changed. It's a different universe. It may be able to survive COVID more easily than the theater itself because there's no audience involved, but it's a very different experience, because you don't have to, you do it 3 or 4 times and then it's in the can and it's done.
Yeah.
Theater, you have to keep doing the whole thing every night and getting it right all the time.
Yes.
So I prefer theater.
Oh, it's wonderful. Live, you can't
Yeah.
beat live performance, can you? And you said about
No.
Gypsy as your other favorite
Yes.
lovely show.
Yes.
So when were you working on Gypsy? And because you were working with, what were you working on Gypsy? Because that was when, excuse me, that was when Corey English was in it, wasn't it?
Yes, Gypsy happened right after my off-Broadway situation closed, the Equity Library Theater, and it was the same people, some of the same people I had worked with on Lacage, Legs, Diamond, and Carrie, so it was familiar people, and of course it was a great show. She's a brilliant actor. I've seen several Gypsies. I mean, we have the opportunity, I saw the Imelda Staunton one on film recently, and so it was a terrific production. And what was the question? I've gotten lost.
It was a wonderful show, and was that where you first worked with? No, it wasn't, with Corey English. I was just trying to work out when you and Corey met.
Yes, Corey was the baby. He told you the story of someone not being able to stay with the show and going down to the wardrobe supervisor, Larch Miller, and him saying that pants could always be shortened because Corey was small. So yes, that was Corey's first, and then Corey was in Guys and Dolls, and Corey was in Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. And then when we did Producers in London, he happened to be the understudy, and so it was nice to see him again. He's made some very smart moves, developing his choosing to go to England to broaden his performance skills so that he would not be perceived as just the boy, or because he had nowhere to go beyond Barnaby in Hello Dolly until he gained extra skill and extra training in London. He's been very smart about that. But we had Arthur. Yeah, Corey did all this name dropping. I should get to do some of that too. I was at the Palace. I was at the Palace when they held George Abbott's 100th birthday party for him.
Oh.
Yes, so I have that connection, and Arthur Lawrence, of course, was on Gypsy, and Arthur Lawrence also directed Nick and Nora. I don't know if you recognize it from the CV, but he directed that as well and wrote it. I may be wrong about the direction, but he did write it. I think he directed it. And it was recorded in the UK. It's an obscure musical, but it has some good stuff in it.
Ken, tell me about George Abbott's 100th birthday, because that must have been extraordinary. And you say at the Palace, but you don't mean Buckingham Palace, do you? Which, it must have been a theatre.
I mean the Palace Theatre in New York, where Lacage was playing.
Uh-huh.
And they had a one-night benefit on a Monday night, and they invited boatloads of celebrities to all come up and say things about him. And the costume people, not me, but the costume designer attached to Lacage, coordinated what everybody was wearing. And it was a big event, and there was a cake. And it was, I don't know if it was filmed, I don't know if it exists archivally, but that's how his career was celebrated. His 100th year was at the Palace Theatre. So I can drop that one too. I think I can drop just about all the names Corey did.
Oh, thank you.
And two with not Jerome Robbins. I have no experience with Jerome Robbins, only with his the woman who worked next to him as a dance captain was on Gypsy, and she made sure that his choreography was what it was supposed to be for Gypsy, the Tyne Daly version. Of course, it gets altered when somebody else has say over it. She also made sure that it was archived. Her name is Bonnie Walker. She made sure that it was archived by the Bette Midler made-for-television Gypsy. Okay. So that is the official record of how Arthur Lawrence wanted that choreography done in Gypsy.
I just love hearing this, because it's your life backstage, isn't it? You make it happen, and if you aren't there, my goodness. I mean, and I was fascinated to read that you'd worked at the St. James Theatre for so long, because that's such a historic theatre, isn't it? Isn't that where Oklahoma opened?
Yes, in 1947, when we did the Producers there.
Wasn't it 1943?
Oh, why do I think 47?
Are you thinking about?
Yes, I think.
No, that's Imperial. But anyway, St James Theatre
Okay.
is a landmark, isn't
I,
it?
yes, it is. It was built in 1927. I
Okay.
think I have that right. And Oklahoma was 1943. And when we were doing the producers, Celeste Holm came backstage to see Nathan. And when she went into his dressing room, I said, "Be careful, there's a step down here." And she said, "Oh, yes, I remember that," because this was her dressing room when she did Oklahoma.
And she was Ado Annie, wasn't she? Am I right?
Yes, she was. Yes, yes, you're right.
And I've read that she did, for her audition, that she did some hog calling to get the part as part of her.
Okay.
Because one of the lovely things about Ado Annie is because that, well, this is according to what I've read, is that they were looking for that production. They were looking for not big names, but for performers who could actually sing and act and dance. And the funny thing is about the part for Ado Annie Can't is that when Gloria Graham played her in the film, that the joke, the so-called joke, was that she couldn't sing in tune. But I absolutely adore the way Gloria Graham sang "I Can't Say No" in Oklahoma.
Yes.
I can just imagine Celeste Holm doing that. But she had a terrific career as well, didn't she? I mean, she was in high film, wasn't she? If I've got that right.
Yes. Yes. Gentleman's Agreement, All About Eve. That's her biggest theater film, All About Eve. You should know that one. She had a huge career, and she was lovely. She came backstage several times. You said about choosing unknowns. When they cast, the Oklahoma people, and she talked about the dressing room, the double room dressing room that Nathan Lane had 4 people in it when they did Oklahoma. She shared with another girl in the first room, and the 2 men were in the other room. So yes, they didn't have a lot of star buildup for that
And
original production. And also, I'm going to throw this in because we didn't get there yet. King and I was originally done there with Gertrude Lawrence and Yul Brynner. Pajama Game was originally done there that made Shirley MacLaine a star. She came backstage and took her guests down to see the dressing room where she was just a spot on the table.
Because she was originally the understudy, wasn't she?
Yes, Carol Haney. She understudied Carol Haney.
Because I read,
a lot.
So I'm always saying I read, but I read that she was stuck on the subway one day and on her way, I think, to do a matinee, when she wasn't particularly worried about it because she had plenty of time, but she'd got stuck underground. And when she arrived at the theatre, I don't know who it was that was waiting for her. They were going, "Where have you been? You've got to go on." And so there was that crazy moment where she just had to get her stuff together and go on. But there was a producer in the audience. It's always that story. It's Hugh Jackman when he was in Oklahoma. There was the producer of her next film. It was her big break, wasn't it? From being in the pajamas and going straight into film.
It is. And then she went out to Hollywood. Yes, and she did very well. She worked for Hitchcock almost right away.
Yeah.
Well, when we did Nathan's first play that had his name over the title, Mike Nichols was in the audience, and that's what led to the Birdcage.
Okay.
So it still happens a little bit.
Yeah. Oh yes, we've done lots of names.
It's a lot of history.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Well,
before I move on to another question,
Corey,
what's your favourite theatre? That got you.
Yeah, I don't know that I can say that. They all have their pluses and minuses. The thing about New York is very, very few of them have elevators. So those, I think, get singled out right away. There's an elevator at the, where we did Angels in America, although I was right on deck level, so I didn't have to avail myself of it. And there had been an elevator at the Palace Theater that was put in for Sarah Bernhardt when she was doing Hamlet with a wooden leg. And so they installed an elevator to take her up to the dressing room. So if I was going to single out 2 theaters as special, I would name those 2, because otherwise it's just miles and miles of stairs until you can hardly walk. So they all have their pluses.
Yeah, keeps you fit.
I guess. And I did enjoy the the Lyceum too. I think it's the oldest theater in New York. It still has a lot of very old theater features, like dressing rooms behind the proscenium arch, so that in the days when stage management whistled to call people to the stage, you can see how that was physically possible to do. So those are interesting, the ones that have been able to remain as they were historically.
I know the Lyceum, if I've got the right theatre. That's the Schubert Theatre, isn't it? Because it's...
I think it's a Jude Janison theater. I know the show I did there was with Lincoln Center, so it was a deal they worked out somewhere among themselves. And that was the Nance.
Okay.
Yeah. That was a play. I didn't put there is a song in it, so maybe it counts a little bit as a musical. And it's on YouTube. It's great to see. Great work.
Which one? I didn't hear you.
The Nance. It's about the it's about the theatrical convention of having homosexuals on stage that pretty much vanished around the late 30s as a decency concern. But it's just like Gypsy. It has a balloon girl in it, which I think is very exciting. It's a good show, but it's a play, and we're talking musicals, so I've wandered.
No, that's fine. It's lovely to wander. Okay, but back to musicals. Who's your favourite artist yesterday and today? And let's keep it musicals if possible.
Julie Andrews is always the top of the list. There's nobody better than Julie Andrews ever. Nathan Lane, Maggie Smith, they're all the top in my book. People from the past, I think the question was originally phrased as people with us and no longer with us. Mike Nichols, who's not a performer, but a brilliant director who founded so many careers. Merman, of course, you can't leave Merman out of it. And Roger Reitz and Elaine Stritch.
Oh, Elaine Stritch.
Terrific, terrific. We went to the same foot doctor. And she came to see Nathan quite often. Yeah, and she was a character. She's a terrific, terrific person. And all the stories are interesting.
She's force of life, wasn't she? So strong.
Yes. She used to go to the box office and say, "I'm Elaine Stritch, give me a ticket." And they always did.
So she didn't.
Yeah, any show. No, she would just go the day of and say, "I want a ticket." Of course, they always gave it to her.
How naughty.
Yeah. She was who she was. She got away with it.
Yeah, well, you can't blame her. And I suppose...
No.
Yeah. How lovely.
She was into... Yes. When there was a theater community, when there were people who were really ingrained in it all the time, she was one of them. I don't know that we have that.
Do you not think we have that still?
I don't. I think Nathan was the last one. Because it's just so hard to make, the productions are, if they run, they go beyond one person's energy. But, it's always, even Rosalind Russell couldn't believe that anybody else would ever play Auntie Mame but her. She wanted the show to close when she left. But when you've got a brilliant show that's been infused with a terrific talent, it should go on. But people become identified with roles, and we're glad they create what they do, give to it everything they have. So
going back to Max Bialystock, because I can't resist going back to Max Bialystock.
Sure, I know all the answers.
What an exhausting role that is, because it's just, Corrie, who I've got to explain for anybody that hasn't seen the Corrie English interview, he's talked about how exhausting it is, and he's played that role on tour and at Drury Lane. But I didn't really think about it until he said how full-on physical it is. You've got to really be on it, haven't you?
Yes. Well,
Dreyfus was slated to do it in London, wasn't he? But it was just so much.
Yes, he's 12 years older than Nathan. I don't think that's anything negative to say, but it takes a lot of energy, and he just wasn't up to it. But I wanted to divert from that. And do you know the story about Ethel Merman and Gypsy? another tour de force, but she specified in her contract that when they built the show, she should have a 10-minute rest in the first act and a 15-minute rest in the second act, so she could pull herself together. So in the first act, it's Little Lamb, and in the second act, it's the Three Strippers.
Okay.
That was Ethel Merman's structured opportunity to rest so that she could go out and do Mama's Turn. Now, with producers, Nathan asked to have that whole recap of the show put in at the end when he's in the jail cell, and he regretted it a couple of times because you're tired by then, and then you're doing the whole show by yourself. But he had the stamina, and he did it, and I said to him after that, you've got to make sure, and not that he's listening to me, he's not listening to me, he doesn't need my advice at all, but anytime you can build in a rest for yourself, maybe you should do that. But when Nathan's energy leaves the show, the stage sort of dies. So that's how much he puts out.
You've clearly built up to have worked together for so long, this amazing relationship. It must be like an accompanist with a singer. An accompanist, I've studied singing, and I know that my accompanist always knew when I was going to go wrong before I knew I was going to go wrong. And I think that's how I feel like you must be when you're working with somebody direct, that you know what they're going to want before they know what they want it.
That's what Helen Mirren said in Gosford Park, isn't it? That's what a good servant is. You have to know what they want before they know they want it, and have it in your hand.
Yeah, but it's a collaboration more than anything.
It's being sympathetic to what you both know the demands are.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't mean to overstate my importance in any way. I'm fortunate to have had the chance to be there, to be of help sometimes. I don't always get it absolutely right, but I try. I try very hard. So any support I can give to any of the artists I'm working with, I think that's what I'm there for.
I'm going off track here, but we're allowed to. I know my magic nights in the theatre that I've had when I've been to the theatre. I can remember those. They just stand out. And I've got to ask you, I mean, for goodness sake, you must have about, I don't know how many memories that are absolute magic, and they always will be, and standout moments for you.
Yes. Several the two that I think of right away are from very early on. One is, of course, Gypsy. There is, when Louise does the strip changes, Tyne Daly is such a detailed, amazing professional that the show was structured so that when she does the first strip, and I'm assuming you know the show well, when she does the first strip, Mama Rose says, give him a glove. And Tyne had that structured so that as that was happening on stage, she was in a quick change booth that was built upstage with a microphone, and she was getting out of the costume, out of the old wig, and then she would walk behind the set with a stage manager with a flashlight, and I'm following her with the dress. She'd go back up to her dressing room, up a flight of stairs to the dressing room, sit down at the makeup table while the other two strip changes are happening. She would do a completely different makeup, put on a different wig, a different dress, and paint her nails.
Never.
Now just think of the focus that took. Paint her nails, come back down to deck, and look at the pearls in the jewelry box on the set to put her in a sense memory place, and then go out and do the scene in the dressing room where she confronts her daughter. But the feeling that I got walking behind her with the flashlights and the backstage and the wig cap, to go do all of that detail work and come back on, that always felt like magic to me. That was magic. And there was another moment in Legs Diamond where I had a very, very complicated change. And it was kind of just off the set. It was two gangsters out of suits into other suits. And as they were doing the changing, you had to get all of the pieces right. There were lights hidden in the floor that revolved up, and it changed, and that always felt like magic too, because you were focused on what you were doing in between what they had seen them in before, what they were going to see them in next. And as you were in that tiny space, the lighting was changing, the sets were moving, and they were becoming something else. Those both always felt like magic every time I did them.
How do you do that? Do you have to have lots of lists?
Lots of
learn it physically.
What they do in Broadway is you have to know it physically and you have to know it by heart.
Yeah.
As you develop it, as you start on a show, you walk around behind the people and you write pages and pages of notes. Then you go home and you read them to yourself. You try to boil them down. You try to remember segments of things that happen. The hardest shows where there's a very, very long segment when there's no time to read. The most difficult thing is learning the timing, when you can breathe, when you have to have it in your hands right away. So learning the timing and having it in your head, but both of those, there was no time to look at anything. You just had to be present and doing it and look like you knew what you were doing. So you know it as well as the actor knows the words and the songs.
Yes.
Yeah.
What was it like working on the Carjo Fall? And what was it like when that opened?
I came in the last year and a half.
Yeah.
I wasn't there at the opening. They had it was a very difficult show, and when you start on Broadway and you don't go right into a job, you swing where you learn somebody's track and you do that for a while, and all the tracks are written separately and you learn all of the different things, and then in your mind you start putting together how all of the things interact. So sometimes you might be on stage left in the upstage booth. Sometimes there was a fly gallery in La Cage that all of the coats went up to. That was another thing that always felt like magic. You had to take an elevator up to the 4th floor, that Sarah Bernhardt elevator, and then you walked out on a catwalk, and when the coats flew up into the air, you took them off the rings and the hooks and carried them back and took them in the elevator and took them down. I think I've lost your question now. So La Cage, it was learning, and La Cage was so hard, the first one, because they made such an effort, and in subsequent productions this has disappeared, such an effort that you couldn't tell what gender anybody was. So when you're learning the changes, somebody comes to you and they're a redheaded woman. Then the same person comes at you and they're a blonde man. And then the same person comes at you and they're a brunette woman. And they were all completely different people seeing them, and yet you had to recognize who you were going to help with something fast to go back on. And there was the 3 very fast changes in a row, the tuxedo, the birds, and the can-can. So you had to think how far ahead, again, about timing. You couldn't just concentrate on what you were doing at the moment. You had to be ready to do the next change and the next change and know where they were. So it was complex, but it was so magical and so much money and so glamorous and so different. Yeah. And such a good show and great music. And they really knew they were going out on a limb when they did it the first time. And my parents loved it. It's a love story, and that's why it works. And it's survived lots of different productions, but it was a terrific first way to get your feet wet. I learned 6 different tracks on that show and repaired beadwork in the afternoons.
And you must have met some amazing people doing that show, real characters.
Well, let me think. Peter Marshall, I was excited to meet Peter Marshall. I don't know that there's any names because I wasn't there at night. Van Johnson was in it, the old film star. There were a lot of good people, and just like you said to Corey, when you shake hands with past, I've been there as it's all sort of dimming, and I feel very fortunate that I got to be as close to it as I did.
I think
for as long as it was
going. But I suppose it's still happening, isn't it? I mean, and also I've got 2 more questions that are nothing to do with the meetup questions, because I just have been
sure, that's fine.
One of them was, if anybody wants to be a young person these days wants to be a dresser. They listen to this conversation and they think, I'd love to do that. I wonder what he studied at school. What were you good at? What was it that showed you, what was it you were drawn to?
I think the thing that did me the most good, and I didn't even really choose this, was sewing.
Yeah.
I never had a sewing class. I never had any instruction in that. But my mother's mother, she was from a family of 6 that were ministers' children. And to keep the children occupied when they had no money, her mother taught all of them to sew, to embroider and do handcraft. And so to keep me occupied and my brothers and sisters, my mother had us do the same thing. And it was that really opened the door. Not so in a class, you'll need theater history, you'll need, to learn about what it is you want to do. So they have the background, you know what to expect, history of costumes, but also having hands-on skills and a craft, tailoring, things like that will make you useful. And of course, being able to move fast and having good knees.
So you're good at tailoring.
Well, I've learned a lot.
Quick, haven't you?
It's like self-teaching. Well, you have to alter things, and sometimes, when Corey went into the producers in London, I was working with Nathan, and they got all of the clothes from the Canadian production, and just on the hanger, they weren't that different from Nathan's. And I knew how big Corey was. I went to the supervisor and I said, this is not going to work. The arm's eye on the shirts were down to Corey's waist. I said, you're going to have to adapt these. And they said, well, these have been signed off on, they're fine. I said, they may be fine, but Nathan's voice is not strong and we'd better be prepared if he has to go on. So a lot of it's anticipating too, and seeing what's right in front of you and trying to avoid problems. Someone said that the definition of a professional is someone who has a backup plan.
Plan B, yeah. In fact, I read in the New York Post, there was a story about an unfortunate thing that happened to Nathan in The Frogs.
Yes. He talked about, yes. And the way that happened, he mentioned it in that Drama League nomination, which surprised me that he remembered it. But there was a big dance number at the end. He comes through the floor, and I think he had 30 seconds to get into a flying harness and into a distressed costume. And then he had to go up back through the floor, and they attached bungee cords to his waist, and he bounced up and down while all the choreography was going on with the frogs. And it was all fine. He went through the floor and he had hurt himself very, very badly. I don't know what he hit or what he ran into, but we did the change and he didn't go up.
Ooh.
So he didn't go up, and the actors had to make up how to finish the dance number without him on stage in real time because he didn't go up. So we got to the dressing room. By that time, the dressing room had the choreographer, the stage manager, and a knee doctor had already shown up in the dressing room, and they all looked at each other and talked to him about what had happened. And of course, everybody wanted to be the show must go on. And I finally said, because the intermission was running out, that I've seen him injured many times on stage, but I've never seen him choose not to continue. And I said, that means to me that this is pretty serious and we should get the understudy ready. Yeah. And that's what we did. Not that I pulled rank, not that I thought anybody has the right to say that kind of thing. I was just reading what I had seen from him. In the producers, he got into the trash can in the first scene, hurt his ankle. I had ice ready every time he came off, but he continued to do the show. Frogs, he came off. We did the change. It's not the change didn't work. And he didn't go back on stage. So I knew he was hurt badly and somebody had to make the call. So I made the call on his behalf and they went with it. So the understudy finished the show.
He's a phenomenal performer, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Absolutely. Knows everything, frontwards and backwards, all the details, everything everybody does, completely supportive, knows his way around everything. Very, very good. I've been very fortunate. Yeah.
And he's such a smart man.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Now, okay,
And in his, yeah.
go on, say, sorry.
Okay. No, I'm done.
Oh, okay.
I'm done. Go, take it.
I'm going to go off subject again. All the
Okay.
theatres that you've worked on in New York, or worked in New York, one of the things that I was fascinated with when I first went to Broadway was that there's a tradition at the end of of course, this isn't one of your questions I said I was going to ask you. There's a
All
tradition
right.
at the end of all the shows that a technician comes out onto the stage and they put a stand with a
Ghost light.
ghost light, yeah,
Mhm.
which, as far as I'm concerned, I've never seen that happen in London or any other theatre in the world, and I was totally charmed by it. And I rather love that, because in this country we pride ourselves on the fact that we own ghosts, that we have all the ghosts, and that our theatres have got stories about ghostly beings at them. And I know which theatre is it? The Ziegfeld Theatre. Is it? I want to say, I've got it up here. The one that Chicago was on. That is it. The Ambassador Theatre, where Olive Thomas.
Amsterdam. The Amsterdam
where Olive
Theatre.
Thomas is meant to haunt.
Olive Tom. Yes.
She
Yes.
was a Ziegfeld girl. But have you ever seen any ghosts? Or
Do you know how she? Do you know how she died?
There was something.
How she died?
Yes, she was in Paris with her husband on a reunion with her husband's second honeymoon, and she drank something like bleach, didn't she?
Mercury.
Oh dear.
Mercury. He was being treated for syphilis, and that's what they did then.
But why did she do it?
It was a mistake in the bathroom in the middle of the night. She
Ooh.
didn't choose to do it. It was an accident. He was Mary Pickford's brother.
Yes.
So yes, Olive Thomas is the ghost of the New Amsterdam Theatre.
But she has been seen in recent times. Have you ever seen anything strange backstage when you've been going about your business? Ghostly.
I know that the Drury Lane has a seat that's always damp that they don't sell.
Yes.
I don't believe that I've ever seen anything that I felt was an apparition, but I always try to respect the idea that many people have been there before me, and I'm lucky to be the one that's there now. So I don't really think I have any stories that are specific about that, but I know they're there. It's their territory, and it's mine at the moment. I think I will be walking down in the St. James from the path that I used to think as I walked from the outside down through the auditorium and up to the dressing room, that would be the path I would walk if I was a ghost. So that's for me in the future. If you're looking for me, that's the theater I'll be in.
Well, hopefully I'll meet you in the flesh rather than before you've gone over to the other side.
Well, how often do you get here? How often do you get here? You saw...
Not very often, but I'm hoping to come back to New York next year when we're all allowed out again. So I'll come and track you down.
Jesus, Sweden. Oh, certainly. I hope I'm back by then too. We just have to let science call the shots. It's nothing we're going to figure out, and tell the truth. We have to be told what's really happening so that we can try to do what's right.
Now I've got to go back to my questions before it becomes evening.
Oh, all right. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Two more. We've got Broadway or West End?
Broadway.
Of course.
But West, well, I've lived in London twice. Yeah. In the West End, it was far more vibrant, 1975 and 1976. So I'll give it credit for that. And of course, the West End, nobody does plays like the West End. I'm getting too close to this screen. The West End for plays, but the American musical is my favorite. And of course, it only comes from America. It's our art form.
You're right. I agree.
Oh.
And I love the way everybody always says, oh no, the West End for plays. But Broadway, well, you're absolutely right. Okay, final question of the meeting is, if you were to write a book about your life up to now, what would the book be called, and what would your favorite chapter be called?
Well, Carol Channing's autobiography is called Just Lucky, I Guess. And I think that's about as good title as you can get, unless it's a lot of luck and a lot of work, because that's what it takes. And if I had a favorite chapter, it would probably be the early flops. The things I did when I was just starting and wanted to make a go of this so much, things like Carrie and Legs Diamond and Nick and Nora, because they were so big and so expensive and so doomed. I'm glad that I've had all the successes I've had, but the exquisite things that we got to see for just a couple of moments before they vanished forever and people won't do them again, that became, very special. Those are always the best talking points. When people find out you did Carrie, and that was an actress from your country, Lindsay Haley, and Betty Buckley. It was done over there first, and it was just meant to lose money. So it did.
The production of that the year before last. I think that's the closest I'm going to get to it, really. But I had to go and see it. But it's quite a musical. It's quite something to turn into a musical, isn't it?
Well, yes, and I agree with you absolutely about that. The thing that was so amazing about it to me is it used lighting in a way that I had never seen before, and the production values were so stunning. They had headlights in the drive-in, they had the mirror ball, and all of these things played out into the audience, which I've never had in any other show. And at the end, after the prom, the high school class stairs descended onto her, and she was left standing in the center of it. If you ever get to see production stills, it was all red, black, and white, and it had very high ideals, but it really was just meant to lose money. And Legs Diamond was glorious. Willa Kim clothes, but he was sick. He just wasn't getting better. And Nick and Nora, such good intentions, Arthur Lawrence, but they blamed him for everything, and they didn't like the way the storyline was developing. But we got Faith Prince out of it, who I got to work with on Guys and Dolls afterwards immediately. So those early flops are full of stories.
Yeah.
But I'm proud of the successes too, all the time. And I've been very, very lucky.
What have you got lined up coming up in the future, do you think? Have you got stuff on the cards, fingers crossed, for when it opens again? Or do you not want to mention it?
No, I think I already have. I think I've already dropped the ball on that one. I had everything lined out. I was going to do Virginia Woolf. We were to run through August. Then I have a regular spot doing the Nutcracker New York City Ballet. That would have been my Christmas. I'd have come back in the spring to do The Music Man with Sutton Foster and Hugh Jackman, which I still believe will happen, touch wood. And then the Nutcracker position I can have as long as I want. And Nathan was to do one more show until it was already announced in the press that he was hoping to do, oh, now I'll look stupid.
No, never.
No, the Willy Loman show, Death of a Salesman.
Oh,
he
yeah.
was to do Death of a Salesman with Laurie Metcalf. So I figured if I had the Nutcracker, as long as I wanted to work at Christmas, Music Man, the musical I was going to do that may have been the last. I thought Dolly was going to be my last musical. I thought Dolly would run for 5 years. I was very surprised that it only held on a year.
Do you think
so
that
that's what I would.
Do you think the Schubert just needed another show? Do you think the Schubert just wanted another show to come in there? Because it could have, the cues were phenomenal, weren't they?
Yes. I think it was all what Bette Midler called. And when they replaced her with Bernadette Peters, I think Bernadette was excellent, and Victor Garber, but it was never as once in a lifetime a thing as it was with Bette, and rather than have it become something else. The original ran with everybody on earth in it, and that could have happened, but they just chose not to run it that way.
Yeah.
It's money people's decision, and we're just a tiny cog in it. It's not really, and we're not really any more important than that. So I'm glad I got to do as much of that as I did. I had to leave when Bernadette came in and do Angels in America with Nathan from the National Theater, which I was glad to do.
Oh, yeah.
But it means I didn't get to see as much of Bernadette as I would have liked. So I think it will go on, but I think we have to step aside and let science tell us what to do. And then we'll go forward. But it'll take a long time for the the push to come back, I think.
Well,
So.
we all want it to happen, so it's got to. Ken, this has been the most fantastic conversation. I'm
so flattered you asked.
Pardon?
I'm so flattered you asked.
Oh, I am so delighted to meet you. It's been a wonderful conversation. And of course, the fabulous Corrie English said to me, Ken's got some great stories, and he's absolutely right. Thank you so much for meeting me today.
Certainly. Happy to meet you too. Stay cool.
Much. Yes, and you. Take care.
And be safe, yes.
Yes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Just talking musicals with you.